Hello and welcome to another episode of the Transportation Exchange podcast presented by Rush Trucks of Canada. I'm your host, Jason Cuddy. On today's episode, we're excited to welcome back James Menzies, editor of today's Trucking and TruckNews.com. James, welcome back again to the podcast.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks for having me. It's been a year, eh?
It's been, I think that's the best way to say it. It's been a year. And I thought as we wrap up 22 and we've had you on to kind of do a mid-year review and, an outlook for 22, I thought we'd get you back on and let's chat about kind of what happened this year in all the different segments we like to talk about. And, we'll kind of put our predictions in for 23. So maybe start it off with what 22 looked like, maybe starting off with the trailer side.
Yeah, it's, a lot of the things we've been talking about over the past year are still issues today. And on trailers, those part shortages that we talked about and the supply chain disruptions and the labor shortages have really had an impact on pricing. Trailers, of course, have a lot of metal, a lot of steel, a lot of aluminum. We saw what happened to those commodity prices. So fleets are complaining because they haven't been able to get trailers this year. And those that they have gotten are 2 to 3 times more than what they were initially quoted.
Yeah.
So that's been a real challenge. And as a result of that, fleets are keeping their trailers in use for a lot longer than they normally would. I talked to one fleet that's basically refurbishing trailers and trying to get another 6, 7, 8 years out of them because now all of a sudden those trailers they used to just be a box on wheels, so simple. And now they look at them as an asset that's actually quite expensive and expensive to replace, and difficult to replace because they're having all these shortages just like they are on the truck side. So it's been a tough year to get trailers, and if you do get them, fleets tend to be hanging on to them longer.
Yeah, I've had a couple customers, same thing where surprisingly the chassis, are rolling in quicker than the trailers. Having played in the trailers before, I was stunned by the pricing that's come out. And like I said, it's just the materials inside it and just, where the market's been. But it's, we thought the trucks were bad. The trailers are just as bad, if not worse. And, it's unfortunate with what we're going through. But like I said, if you can get them and you can keep them and keep them on the road longer than the usual lifespan you'd cycle them through, I think the fleets are finding a way to make use of that for sure.
Yeah, a lot of the buyers are wondering if these price increases are here to stay or whether they'll come back down. And, when you're in an inflationary environment, it's not often you see the prices come down to where they were beforehand. So some of those pressures might ease, but I think that your old van trailer is always going to cost more than you're used to paying for it.
Yeah, you've seen that, guys, definitely at the beginning of this year. I think maybe before they realize the struggle of getting new equipment, we're kind of cashing in, on their used stuff. They're selling, 5-year-old trailers for more than what they paid for them.
Yep.
Now, if you had new ones rolling in, you're great. But obviously, if you rolled the dice and you didn't, you could have, mismanaged that pretty badly. But the guys are definitely cashing at the beginning of the year for this.
And the backlogs are still long. We heard from Great Dane just the other day that they're looking almost a year in advance. They're taking orders now for trailers that aren't going to be delivered for quite some time. So this is an issue that's going to remain for the foreseeable future.
Agreed. And I think, from what we do some trailers, but, van body seems to be the prominent one where we see this. But, when we move into the Class 8 medium duty, get into the power side part, we know really well. Same thing. We're seeing the same struggles, not so much as big of delay, say in the trailer side, but definitely delay for what we hoped would be a smooth 22, which wasn't. A lot of stuff got pushed back and is getting pushed into 23. But what are you seeing across the industry?
Yeah, many of the same challenges on the Class 8 medium duty side. The good news there is that the manufacturers tend to say that the worst they think is behind us, especially as it comes to microchips. But as soon as that happens, there's something new that pops up. And now we hear that tires are going to be in tight supply going forward because a lot of the manufacturers now, when they have such heavy demand and only so much supply available, they'll tend to redirect that towards channels that pay better. And apparently retail pays better than the OEM channels. So you might see some unfamiliar tire brands on new trucks and trailers in the new year. And it just goes to show that as soon as one fire is put out, another one begins, because tires I don't think they were on the list of shortages that we talked about last time.
No, they weren't on the list. I know from our side, we saw some minor surcharges against them like everything else. So they got hit a bit, but there wasn't an issue, from a supply side by any means. Like I said, it was the microchips definitely driving a large chunk of that. And I agree. We would see a resolution one and then something else would fail as far as availability. And it just seemed to be that was kind of the story of 22 and on the Class 8 and medium duty stuff is resolve the big issue. And then, the smaller ones would creep up.
Like playing whack-a-mole. You whack one and then another one pops up. The thing that's good for the truck and trailer OEMs is that they tend to be so tightly connected with the general economy, and now we're heading into a slower period for the economy. A lot of people saying that a recession is imminent, and the truck and trailer manufacturers have so much demand to get through that should keep them going pretty steady without those big layoffs that we've seen at plants in the past. Anytime there's been a downturn.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, and that was part of the struggle when things were ramping back up was personnel, right? I mean, you could get, the product wasn't an issue as far as getting materials, but it was people. And now we've got people and we have material issues. So, but I agree, I think the pipelines, I was talking to, some body manufacturers, everyone, for the most part is pretty much booked out for 23 already. If you don't have your order in, I don't know if you're getting anything next year.
Right. And the OEMs say that they're not seeing a lot of cancellations, even though the market conditions are softening. Fleets are they're still taking those queues and sitting on those queues because they know how difficult it is to get equipment right now.
Yeah, I think that's what a lot of guys are kind of rolling the dice with, maybe on the OEM side with the, the Class 8 stuff specifically was, people were putting up, fake orders kind of, whether it's the dealerships putting in placeholders of, a couple hundred trucks here and there, or actually, carriers putting in orders across every OEM and see who delivers first and cancel the rest. But we haven't seen that play out yet. We haven't seen those mass cancellations. I think a lot of people, the last recession, in 08 kind of thing, when things softened, we saw a lot of that, where fleets would bail, but we haven't seen that. And I think part of it is the pent up demand. It's, the economy is softening, but they're still trying to catch up from 2 years ago.
Yeah, and getting back to what you said earlier on the trailer side, a lot of fleets saw the used equipment demand prices go through the roof. Yeah. And took advantage of that. They seized the opportunity to sell some of their used trucks, and now it's difficult to replace those vehicles as they try to do so, and they try to get back on their traditional buying cycles or trade cycles.
Yeah, agreed. So I mean, like from a component point of view, delay wise, like you said, I think we've seen a lot of the microchip processor stuff definitely ease off, but everything's still, I think when we talked midway through the year, obviously the conflict and war in Ukraine wasn't on the radar at the beginning of the year, and that, it's not until something gets disrupted you realize how much stuff is actually made in a certain country.
That's right.
So we saw that kind of disrupt a lot of supply chain issues for at least for the Class 8 medium duty stuff.
Yeah, I mean, Ukraine is a big producer of steel, and then China continues to wrestle with COVID related challenges, and we all know how many components on a truck come from China these days. Yeah,
and speaking of that, I mean, the biggest constraint, I think, outside of probably manpower now is really just supply chain, like getting stuff where it needs to go.
Yeah, and a lot of the fleets that I've heard from recently said their biggest issue, of course, they're frustrated that they can't get the trucks and trailers, but they've managed to cope with that. But when they have a breakdown now, just getting the parts is a big issue. So they have trucks sitting in the shop or sitting on the fence for much longer than traditionally, waiting for those parts. And some of the part suppliers are doing their best to make sure that those parts aren't being stocked up and put in a warehouse somewhere. They're going to trucks that are actually down and need that part right away. So that continues to be an issue on the part side as well. It's not just trailers and trucks, it's individual parts.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that. I've had some customers, unfortunately, a piece of equipment goes down and it's sitting for significantly longer than it normally would. And it's not the inability to repair it. It's the, unavailability of the part required to repair it. And, to the point where normally you would deal with your local repair shop, reach out to a local rep, where now you're calling the OEM of that specific part to get some answers. And it's the same answer. It's not a stocked item. The next time it's available, it's going to get shipped out. It's a hot rush, part to get out. But right now there is no inventory anywhere. Like I said, no one's really stockpiling anything to kind of pull from.
No, absolutely. I heard Bison Transport actually early on in the cycle saw that there were going to be shortages of brakes. So they ordered a couple containers full of brakes, but that was done well in advance, and that's trickier to do now because you can't get those. And of course the suppliers now are being very diligent to make sure that they're being ordered on demand and going on trucks that need them right then and there.
Yeah, no, and that's what we're seeing. And the guys have had to juggle to figure out ways to keep their fleets running because, your normal supply chains aren't as reliable as they used to. And that's just the nature of the economy right now. And, if you can only build X amount of widgets, at said OEM part manufacturer, and you have twice as much demand on the new side plus the aftermarket side, it's got to go somewhere, right? And that's where we saw those delays on the on the lines of stuff getting built because there's no parts for this particular item for this week, so the line shut down so that they can redirect it to the aftermarket side to keep those trucks up and running. So Yeah, it's been that's been a huge challenge for sure. But with the challenges comes some positivity, and part of what we're seeing now is there is a bit of a shift in the overall, I guess, industry, and we're starting to see a larger uptick on EV technology, specifically now in Canada, with regards to the regulations coming in that'll help kind of bring the cost down a little bit. Overall, as a market, what are you seeing from what 22 did for us, and maybe the outlook for 23 with the EV stuff?
Well, the good news there is that this year the federal government did come forward with incentives, because economically you still need those incentives in order to get a payback on an EV. We are starting to see some Class 8 electric vehicles trickle in. Most of those have been in British Columbia and Quebec, which have good provincial incentives as well. And a lot of fleets are just dipping their toes in with the smaller vehicles, whether it be Sprinter vans for last mile deliveries within the city, or straight trucks. I know International now has a couple out west, the EMV. Mm-hmm. So it's coming. The speed at which it's coming, I don't know if it's going to come here en masse as quickly as some predict, because we still have this issue with the fueling infrastructure,
Agreed.
The charging infrastructure. And I was at a conference just the other day, and Robert had inquired about getting 15 to 20 or 30 chargers put into a facility in Quebec, and they were told, no, we can't supply that much power. And in other smaller towns and municipalities in the States, the fleets that have looked to electrify have been told, no, what you're asking to do here is bring in as much power as we have available for the entire municipality. So it's not practical to roll these trucks out really quickly, especially for long haul. So, the transition has begun, and certainly it's going to continue, but it could be slower than some government would like to see.
Yeah, I think the infrastructure is the biggest piece. I know we had Richard Ross on. We were chatting with him, and they do a lot in California, and they're basically building a brand new fueling station that is everything except diesel, right? Mm-hmm. So hydrogen, LNG, obviously electricity. So it's interesting to see, but it's going to take, that times multiples of 100 to be able to, support the industry. But, one of the things that came out in that conversation was, you need the infrastructure to make this product viable. Otherwise it won't see its true potential. So, the challenge is getting enough power to where you need it, because, these trucks require a lot, especially when you get to the Class 8 size and the size of batteries are in them. They require a lot of power to come in, and depending on where they are situated, I mean, you look, say, in the GTA, the hub is, that Mississauga corridor right by the airport. Well, if all of a sudden all those fleets want to go electric, you've got a huge draw. So, I know the municipalities are aware of it. Obviously, there's a plan. It's going to take some time, but that'll be the current kind of uphill battle is facing is getting the infrastructure to a point where it needs to be able to support the volume that you need to see an impact to start happening in the industry for sure.
Yeah, and I think we need to see more collaboration between the OEMs to get this fueling infrastructure out there. I mean, the chargers that they're using are all the same. We see Volvo and Mack have started working with Pilot in the U.S. to get charging stations at truck stops in the U.S. And in Europe, Volvo and Daimler, arch enemies, are actually working together to build out this charging infrastructure. So I think it's going to take some strange partnerships that we might not have seen before in order to get the network out there as quickly as we need it.
Agreed. And I think it's in all the parties' best interest to kind of do that. I know we did an EV summit with a customer, and one of the conversation that came out was about the different types of charging systems available, and the comment we kind of made back to them was all but one OEM is kind of on board with which type of charger and which type of port to use, and the type of charging. So as you're trying to plan out your business and trying to plan out your infrastructure, most of us have kind of got on board to kind of make it easier for you, so you can kind of interchange between the OEMs. So, yeah, I agree. It's kind of almost, for some of that stuff, it's become almost like the beta VHS version of which one do I roll the dice with that's going to be implemented. But I think in the interim, like you said, everyone's agreed to a certain sort of infrastructure to work with as far as what they can all use, and then now it's a matter of all the OEMs working together to try and support the infrastructure at the public level to get it out, outside of the customer's facilities to be able to support it as it's on the road.
Mm-hmm. And the ironic thing is, who started this race to electrify? Elon Musk. Tesla. He's been distracted lately, and we still haven't seen that Tesla Semi. I think some good has come from that, because it's caused all the incumbent OEMs to really accelerate their plans to electrify. lit a fire under them. And ironically, that Tesla Semi is nowhere to be seen.
Yeah, and I think part of it, I mean, we see, I know from the national side, I was at this demo event, we had the ERH, so electric, day cab, and it was neat to see, but really the value with the infrastructure the way it is today is, truck coming home every night. I think that range anxiety is real for everyone right now because of the lack of infrastructure. So, the Tesla Semi is a very cool looking semi, but I think, like you said, the smaller vehicles seems to be where the initial push is, and just because it's easier to control, you can manage the infrastructure. There's less worries, and if it's from support from service point of view, you can put it next to a facility that can support it, because that's the other challenge going to be is then, keeping these things on the road when things do fail, because, things will fail. There's not as many mechanical pieces, but there's still stuff going on, and you can't just bring it to your local shop down the street. This is, high voltage electricity equipment that requires different training. So you got to be close to that facility as well too. So there's lots of things, I think, where coming home every night really helps start the base for it. And then as the infrastructure grows, you kind of add on to the range. Yeah,
I'm really encouraged to see the dealers getting up to speed. I mean, even though there's not a ton of demand right now, the training that's being provided to the technicians, they're really moving quickly to familiarize themselves with the technology and the charging requirements. So I think that the dealer support's going to be there once the charging infrastructure is.
Yeah, I agree, and that's part of it. I know for us, in order to be able to, to sell the EV product, obviously the dealership needs to be able to support it, and it's a big push from charging capabilities on site to training to the facility being able to obviously accommodate an EV vehicle and service it, because it's a different way you service it. Obviously, there's different things involved, so all that needs to be taken into effect, and then the next step will obviously be getting the salespeople trained with regards to. This becomes more of a consultative approach versus, right. A commodity purchase, like, as we're used to now, like, especially now in the market we're in, people will take whatever build slots you can get them. Right. And, you'll go through the spec, and the spec's the spec, but, having gone through a couple of these, it's a way different conversation. You talk about the infrastructure. I mean, great. I can get you an EV vehicle in, say 5-6 months. That's awesome. But if it's going to take you 12 months to get, the hydro, done properly at your facility, you're no further ahead. So you need to have this conversation, with the OEMs and their partners as far as what's involved to get the facility up and running to be able to accommodate it. Because if you do it right, it's great. But if you just kind of get a piece of equipment and hope to drop it in, it could be a very bad experience. So it's a different approach to acquiring assets for your fleet now.
Sure. More reliance perhaps on your friends at the dealership.
Yeah, exactly. So, and one of the other things, I guess, not so much for an overview of 22, but an outlook coming into 23 that I think has been a long time coming. We've talked about lots of times. We've had a chance to talk to Mike at PMTC about it a couple of times, but it looks like it's here. It's finally going to happen. Our E-log regulation is kicking in for 23. What can you share on that one?
Well, I was at the Isaac Instruments user conference just outside Montreal in mid-November, and they talked about being in the process of recertifying their devices. So there was all this talk and this rush to get certified, and those devices had to be recertified, and they're already recertifying before there's even any enforcement of the first round of devices. So that gives you a sense of how long we've been waiting for this, but we're getting finally some clarity from the provinces. In January, the rules for ELDs will apply to all federally regulated carriers. And the provinces of Newfoundland, New Brunswick, Ontario, Manitoba, and the Yukon are going to also enforce the use of ELDs within the province. The outliers seem to be BC and Quebec, which says that they're not going to be ready to enforce the federal regulation by January 1st, but they're still working on it. Right. And the Northwest Territories says that it's simply not ready. Alberta, Saskatchewan, and PEI are not going to require them intra-provincially.
Gotcha.
So it's a kind of a mixed bag, and you really have to stay on top of the regulations to see which of those affect you. But, my understanding from talking to a lot of fleets that have already gone to ELDs, once you do, you see the benefits, the right. Administrative benefits. It's a lot less burdensome to track and audit hours of service. So I think even where they're not required, there's going to be a big uptake, and hopefully fleets are ready now, because this is literally just around the corner, and there's been no shortage of time to get prepared.
No, and he's definitely been aware of it. I mean, there's been soft starts, a couple potential start dates. So yeah, I think, as we talk now, as we're rolling into 23, if you're just thinking about it, you're pretty far behind. But but I agree. I think most people are on board and just kind of getting set up and making sure everything is compliant, ready to go, and more so kind of clearly understanding, where is it being enforced, how's it being enforced, what's required at the enforcement, station to make sure you're compliant. It can show what you need to show. And I think now it's more just the education for a lot of guys. It's just, what is this like in the real world now that it's fully up and running?
Yeah, interestingly, the Truckload Carriers Association was just here for an event, and David Heller, who's their head of policy, was speaking about the ELD rules in the States. They're actually looking to revisit those, seeing how the third-party certification process has gone in Canada. They're considering doing something similar because they still have a list of hundreds of devices that self-certified.
Right.
And a lot of those vendors that self-certified have gone out of business, leaving their customers with a non-compliant device. And they don't want to see that continue. So they're looking to Canada to see how this third-party certification process went. And yes, it took a lot longer, but there are some advantages to it. So it'll be interesting to see if there are any changes in the U.S. to copy what we've done here in Canada.
That's interesting because I think when we talked before, that was a lot of concern with some of the fleets. It's like, okay, I have this, I'm running ELDs for the States and maybe I'm using a self-certified device. But now I'm in, the Canada one's kicking in. Can I use my US one? So you had to wait and see if the device you had was certified. And then, if it was, okay, maybe you can go back and forth. But if it wasn't, then you had us to do something, to your fleet and make a change. So, it could pan out nicely for a lot of these fleets running into US that, hey, if they follow that model, and then, hopefully the certification process is similar. And then, hey, what you already have here, we'll roll into there and it'll flow nicely. But it makes sense to have it, third party certified because clearly there's a reason these companies went out of business.
And in the end, at last count, we had about 55 devices approved for use in Canada that have gone through that certification process. So to me, that's sufficient. That gives adequate choice to the fleets as to what device they want to put into their fleet. And, as for the few hundred other ones that exist in the United States, we might be better off without them here anyway. So I think that the process worked. It took a lot longer than anyone anticipated. Hopefully we're through the delays and we're going to see full enforcement in January, as they say. But in the end, I think we're going to have a better field of devices for fleets to choose from. Agreed.
So, as we look forward to January, maybe we'll, as we did last year, maybe let's do a quick little outlook of, overview of what do you think from everyone you've talked to and kind of what you're seeing out there? What does 23 look like in our industry?
Well, everyone seems to agree it's going to be slower, and they're already seeing signs of that. The rush, the holiday season rush hasn't lived up to expectations. However, how bad will it be? That's a big question. And I think that for most big fleets, they're going to be just fine because what we've talked about over the past 20 minutes or so with the shortage of trucks, trailers, and components, really that saved the fleets from themselves. Because whenever we have these boom times, fleets go out and they buy as many trucks as they can, they hire as many drivers as they can, they chase that freight, and then they have way too many trucks when things go south.
Right, it's true.
And we've seen that cycle play out again and again and again. This time they couldn't do that. They couldn't add trucks. Some of them even sold trucks because they were so attracted to the values that they could get in the used truck market. And I think that as freight volumes kind of normalize or slow, I think most big fleets are in a good position to weather that. Now, the exception to that might be the smaller fleets.
Right.
And there were a ton of startups over the last couple of years chasing freight on the spot market because the spot market rates were through the roof. They were at record levels. The volumes were at record levels. It was actually fairly easy to make money chasing the spot market freight. Well, that's what's really fallen off the cliff.
Right.
Overall load volumes are staying fairly steady, but a lot of that freight's moving back into contract freight, which is mostly controlled by the big fleets. Also, the big fleets have the fuel surcharges in place, so they can recoup the volatility that you see in the diesel prices, which are probably going to stay high. Yeah. And the small guys out there with one or two trucks that are chasing freight on the spot markets don't have that same protection. So I think it's going to be a tough year compared to the couple of years that we've just had, the 2-3 years we just had. But it's going to hit some people a lot harder than others, primarily those small fleet operators.
Yeah, the small ones I worry about, like you said, because they chase the market, which I get is attractive. But obviously they were buying equipment at the height of the value, especially, and obviously because of the availability, it was all used equipment. So, now they've bought 3 or 4 year old pieces of equipment that are probably, once, the stuff starts flowing in, probably hopefully for 23, the value is going to significantly decrease. So, if they do have to sell an asset, it's, they could be upside down on the books for it, or the payments just could be too high because at the time they could offset the payments with the money they're getting in on the spot market rates. But Now that's not there. So, I mean, hopefully, they've got a business model in place that gets them through this. But I agree. I think the large fleets are going to be okay and fine. And the challenges, I think, from we see from the OEM side is really, being able to deliver, what is scheduled on the build and production side for 23 across all different, manufacturers and in different the markets. But that'll be the biggest challenge, is try and maybe level set that production, in 23, so you can start 24 properly and kind of back to what we're used to as far as having, realistic delivery dates and build times and, materials at hand and, having parts availability for the aftermarket as well.
Yeah, it's a bit of a catch-22 for the fleets that couldn't get trucks this year. On one hand, as market conditions soften, they're probably glad that they don't have a whole lot of additional trucks to keep busy. On the other hand, and when trucks do become available, hopefully over the next year, they're going to be a lot more expensive to buy, and also interest rates are going to be a lot higher, and it's going to cost them a lot to procure those trucks. So it's a bit of a catch-22. And for the small fleets, I mean, the U.S. has a lot better data to see what's going on in the employment picture there. And trucking employment is increasing. However, capacity isn't increasing, which tells you already there's a shift underway where these independent owner-operators that went out on their own and started their own company are migrating back to fleets,
right? Whether
that be as a lease op or as a company driver. I think we'll see the same here. We just don't have the depth of the data that they have in the U.S.
Yeah, that's fair. And I think the other part that will be interesting is, you saw the mergers and acquisitions kind of slow down this year. And part of it, I think, is, you said, rising interest rates, but, a lot of companies have, large fleets that usually try and, when they do this, and obviously they're trying to cash in maybe on the fleet asset value at the market rate, but, the true business maybe isn't anywhere close to worth that rate. So I think a lot of guys were a little shy on mergers and acquisitions, just to not overpay for a heavily asseted, company, given the market rating, knowing that, hey, things will turn. So the company is worth it from the business and the infrastructure, sure. But if it was just strictly from an asset point of view, I think you saw those ones kind of slow down this year.
Yeah, the companies that we think of as the big buyers in Canada are sitting on the sidelines for the most part, because you're right, those valuations are based on two of the best years that trucking's ever had. And they feel there's going to be plenty of opportunities to make acquisitions of fleets that are struggling with diesel prices going up at the same time freight's going down. That's going to paint a new picture of what these companies are really worth. And the buyers are pretty well capitalized after a couple good years. They're sitting on a lot of cash, waiting to see how it shakes out. Now on the M&A front, one of the biggest surprises of the year was Challenger Motor Freight being bought by Fast Freight Group. We don't often see mega deals like that in Canadian trucking, so that one kind of was the exception to the rule. But my understanding is that was in the works for a year and a half. Amazing they kept it quiet for that long, but they did a pretty good job of that. So deals will still happen when the fit is perfect and hard to pass up, and it's a good fit for both buyer and seller. We might see some more desperation sales over the next couple of years, though, as small fleets feel the impact of those fuel prices.
True. So, I mean, a lot to look forward to for 23. We'll see how it shakes out. I mean, we'll reconnect maybe in 6 months and see how close we were on this one. I mean, we were close last year. A few things were thrown curveballs to us, so let's see what else comes at us. But I think 23 is kind of the wait and see year. Let's everything kind of settle back out, see what happens with the market, the economy, production. There's a lot of things to kind of level set and kind of reset back to something where we have some certainty as far as what the outlook is going forward.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to characterize it. I don't think the market's falling off a cliff. Well-run fleets that have some protection with a fuel surcharge from rising diesel costs, I think will be just fine. Some smaller players are going to struggle. Some will go broke, some will get bought out, and then on we go.
Yeah, agreed. So, hey, look, I want to thank you again for hopping in with us and doing this. It's always great to chat, do a 6-month kind of review, see where the industry is, and kind of give everyone an outlook of what we can expect in the coming months.
Yeah, it's always fun. Thanks for having me.
Well, that concludes today's episode. I want to thank James from Truck News and Today's Trucking for joining us. And to catch up on past episodes, check out transportationexchangepodcast.ca. Until next time, thanks for listening.